Hello, good evening and welcome to the program. This is Daily Politics on Trust TV. I'm Abdullahi Ahmed. Thank you most kindly for joining us. Tonight on the program, the wait is finally over as President Ahmed Tinubu has formally presented the budget for the year 2026. And of course, the questions have been trickling in. Even before the budget presentation, leading to questions about sustainability, fiscal discipline, and a whole lot more. At the National Assembly, the president did in regular fashion promise a lot of consolidation going forward, telling Nigerians that the worst is over and there will be a lot of strict discipline to the implementation as well as execution of all that has been promised to Nigerians. But it has done very little to pacify so many economists and professionals who still have some concerns about the viability of the data that has been shared by the president while presenting the 2026 budget. This proposal has done very little to dissuade people from having concerns about weak execution, especially regarding the 2025 budget, which has now been extended a little further into 2026, with another concern being expressed about the 2024 budget. So, do these numbers make sense, and what could they actually do to push Nigeria's economy in the right direction? We'll be speaking and asking some of these basic questions about fiscal discipline and the possibility of this $58 trillion budget and what it could do to make things better for Nigerians in the year ahead. We'll be speaking with economic analyst, Associate Professor Ahmed Jibrin from Kano, and we'll also be joined in the conversation by Mukhtar Mohammed, a CEO Finance with Mukhtar, who will be joining the conversation virtually from Lagos to help us provide some context to all of these developments. But first things first, let's quickly give you a snapshot of what the 2026 budget looks like. Some of the key figures. Security is taking the biggest slice for obvious reasons. However, what do we make of all the other numbers attached to it? For instance, the exchange rate, the anticipated or expected revenue generation, the deficit itself, and what that says about the continuous borrowing spree that Nigeria has witnessed over the 2 years of the Tinubu administration. So let's quickly take a quick look at this snapshot of the 2026 budget as put together by Budget, whose work on Nigerian budgets has been quite commendable over the past few years. Let's take a quick look at this graphic display of the numbers, what's in the budget, and have an understanding of what Nigerians can realistically expect. If we can just pull up the graphic from Budget so that we can take a quick look at the numbers, specifically what they actually reference in terms of how many barrels per day the government is projecting that will be produced in 2026, what the threshold is as far as the pricing of crude per barrel, as well as what it expects to generate internally when it comes to those revenue generation. Remember, this past week, a lot of back and forth about what the president has said in August of this year about meeting revenue targets, and what the minister had to say about how Nigeria missed out on over 30 trillion naira in terms of expected revenue generation, and how that is continuing to raise a lot of concern. And there's also some of the points that have been made by experts who have taken a deeper look at the 2025 budget and have had more questions than answers about what the government is sharing, leading to questions about transparency when it comes to the budget processes and implementation in Nigeria, and whether or not the Tinubu administration is adding value in terms of addressing these gaps. So we'll circle back to this one, but let's first take a quick look at the initial budget data itself, the numbers and what you need to know about the over 58 trillion naira budget that has been submitted to the National Assembly by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. This is what budget has put together. Let's just go through the numbers again. You have a budget of 58.7 trillion naira. This is, of course, the expenditure size of the budget. 1,400 naira. This is the projected Naira exchange rate, you could say is well within the realm of possibility because of where the Naira and the dollar is right now. Oil prices, well, the government projects that it will hover around, at least the benchmark is $64.85, and the government expects to produce 1.8 million barrels per day. This is the projection, the key projections as far as the major indicators are concerned. Exchange rate, barrel, cost per barrel, as well as the projected output of crude oil, which is, of course, Nigeria's main revenue earner. And what about revenue generation? Well, the government projects that it is going to generate around 34.3 trillion naira, which in itself, if you subtract that from 58.47 trillion naira, leaves you with 23.85 trillion naira deficit. That means the government has to find the money from somewhere to pay, to at least finance the budget. And that 23.8 trillion naira, you can best believe, would be financed through a lot of borrowings and all the other options that the government has. Subsidy, statutory transfers, I beg your pardon, because subsidy is obviously one question that maybe will be asked behind the scenes. Statutory transfers are around 4.1 trillion naira. 2.2 trillion naira will be overhead cost. Personnel cost, 10.75 trillion naira. Much talked about Oronsai report about cutting the size of government and some of the operations that might not necessarily be optimal. That is going to be one of those issues that will generate a lot of conversations. Debt servicing is going to gulp about a third of the entire budget itself, 15.52 trillion naira. That is what's going to go into debt servicing by 2026 or in 2026. And capital expenditure, of course, taking just under 50% of the budget itself, is 25.68 trillion naira. This is the capital expenditure in the 2026 budget. Right. Let's bring in our first guest in the conversation. Join us virtually from Lagos is someone who understands the numbers, someone who will help us navigate the biggest information from the 2026 budget and where Nigeria is right now. Mukhtar Mohammed, CEO of Finance with Mukhtar, is joining the conversation as financial analyst to help us make sense of these developments. Mr. Mukhtar, thank you so much for joining us on Daily Politics. I just want to start by getting your professional insight into what the president had to say at the National Assembly today and your first impression of the numbers.
Well, thank you for having me in your program. First and foremost, I think for the first time, we've seen the president as a little bit conservative, not as ambitious like what we saw in 2025 budget. Looking at some of the variables. Remember, 2024-2025 budget, we're tagging the exchange rate at about 1,000 naira. Today, they are being conservative, putting it at 1,400, which, like you said, is very realistic where we are today. And so that makes a lot of sense. Oil benchmark $64.68. I think that is that's not being conservative because, again, if you look at what we were before, was $75 per barrel. We didn't even achieve that. We are hovering around $65 per barrel. So I thought that conservatively, the government should have been looking between $57 to $58 or even $55. That would have been a better projection rather than $64.8, which is going to be a very high. I could start knowing that just last week oil price went as low as $58 per barrel, and that was after the rumor of the lifting of sanctions between the Russian and Ukraine, and that could happen this year definitely. So you could see that one have an impact on oil price. You look at capital expenditure. I'm a little bit impressed with capital expenditure. For the first time, we are seeing about 25 point something trillion capital expenditure. This is the first time that it seems like capital expenditure is higher than than recurrent expenditure and maybe, than debt servicing, which is good. But like you said again, revenue is about 34 trillion, and then expenditures about 50. The expenditure about 58 trillion. So that tells you that we are going to borrow. And how are we going to borrow? Which project are we borrowing for? How reasonable are we going to be borrowing? That means you could see a recycling of debt payment that we could have impact on subsequent budget. Oil production benchmark at 1.88 million. I think that looks a little bit fair. If you remember that this year we did that, even if we did it both with condenser and others, that's fair compared to that August 2.1 million barrel per day that was set aside in 2025. So when you look at this, yes, the budget still have its own challenges, which I think is still very huge. But my major challenge will be, how do you form this budget with a shortfall like that in terms of revenue? And if you look at where you are projecting to get your revenue from, capital gain tax, taxation, and others, these policies have not yet hit the ground running. They are complaint center, and we don't even know if by January we'll have a full 100% implementation of the tax law. So all these are what I think will be the major challenge. Good and fine, we are seeing security being given the kind of attention it needs, which we have been doing for the past 4 years. Even if we do that, if the result we get is not commensurate with how much we are spending, hopefully that will improve. The president was very strong on that and saying that they would definitely see an improvement in security. Infrastructure, I think they've done well. Even if you look at some of the infrastructure, you look at how those funding for those infrastructures were made, especially when you look at the Lagos Calabar Coastal Way was not in the budget. Is it not in the budget, and how much will it be costing? Who is going to fund that budget? Is it a PPP or is it strictly a government project? Those are part of the questions that will definitely be getting answered from the Minister for Budget and Planning and the DG of Budget Office anytime soon.
Right. Of course, we understand that the government is considering the option of converting that Lagos Coastal Highway into a PPP where a private partner would perhaps take over the rest of the construction. Something that has been out there, but no real bite regarding whether this is going to happen in next year's budget execution or not. But just before we segue into discussing what has already happened in 2025, because as much as people are looking ahead, some are more concerned about what has happened this year with the 2025 budget, or at least what didn't happen with the 2025 budget. Let's take a quick look at this tweet that was put together by Budget that questions some of the numbers that the government is sharing. Let's pull up this particular tweet on the screen so that we can understand where some of the concerns are coming from, especially from experts like yourself. Budget said, while the Budget Office has not provided full implementation reports, MTEF document shows that the federal government raised 13.6 trillion naira as of July 2025 and spent 20.39 trillion naira. However, the Minister of Finance said the federal government had raised only 10.7 trillion naira so far. So, I think it's obvious that Nigerians are not being told the entire truth. What do you think is playing out here when numbers do not add up? Especially if you consider what the president said in August about meeting revenue target with a quarter of the year still to go.
Well, I think you and I know that is not true. We didn't hit revenue target. The same minister was saying that we had a shortfall about 31 trillion. Just last week, he was talking about our revenue shortfall. Definitely, if you look at the president team, they've not been coordination in terms of policy direction. If you ask me who will I believe, I'll believe the Minister for Finance, which is the coordinating minister of the economy, rather than believe whatever the president will be saying. Because again, he is supposed to be giving us those figures. It's a challenge that this current administration has had, because it's like people talk from two parts of their mouths. You are hearing from the senior special assistant, the next minute you are hearing from this senior special assistant one, or will I say senior special assistant two. Then if Balowa is not talking, Sunday Dare is talking, or the senior special advisor to the president also will be talking, and then you have the minister of finance. So there's no coordination. You look at the social media handle also, it's always different from. So I think there's no coordination. But I think I tend to agree with Budget IT. When you look at those numbers, they came out with fact to realize how much we are realized in terms of compared to what the government is saying. So I tend to agree. But you shouldn't forget that it is not new to this government. Let's make that clear. Almost all governments in Nigeria have not present budget with certainty, especially in the area of data presentation. And so that is the more reason why you see those challenges in terms of implementation, where people complain that what we said we want to do, we are not really doing it. You see implementation. Now you're talking this current administration is running almost two budgets at the same time, 2024 and 2025 concurrently running, and has even extended it to March this year to come. So we have what the Buhari administration was able to achieve, even if I had a challenge that is not anywhere that you must see your financial year end must be January. But when you look at a country, it's better to have it in January so that people could plan through the year. So Buhari was able to maintain that. But today, what we are seeing, we have deviated from that space now. We'll be having maybe before the National Assembly will finish the budget, it has to be March because already they said a certain budget will have to run till March. Don't forget that they also the doctrine that it's the National Assembly that tells you that a certain budget can also run for 6 months. So don't be surprised whereby if at the end of March we are not seeing the kind of implementation in terms of these budgets have not been passed or they're still going through one area or the other, you could see it extend again into July. It's not good. It's more or less like executive rascality we are seeing in the area of budget presentation. It has never been like this in this nation where you have two budgets running concurrently and based on what we call capital projects. I tend not to understand how that has happened.
And what kind of impact is that going to have when you consider the president giving reassurances about fiscal discipline in next year's budget implementation? 2024 has not run out yet. I mean, it's going to run out by December this year. At least that's what the latest development is. Like you did say, who knows? There could be another extension of even the 2024 budget into next year, despite the fact that we understand that 2025 has been extended to March of 2026. You talk about rascality, but what is the cost on Nigeria's economy and Nigerians who really just want these numbers to have a direct correlation on their cost of living, for instance?
Yes, when you talk about rascality, that's why you see that what we are getting in terms of data is different from what is really on ground. I give you one example. You tell the ordinary man on the street inflation is coming down and he asks you how. Because again, when you look at the inflation data, year to year seems to be coming down because of the rebasing of the economy, but month to month is still sparking. And if you look at the budget presentation today by the president, they are expecting a end of the year inflation figure to be about 16%. That means we might still have those spark in 2026. So that is not tallying with the reality on ground. So I guess why a lot of Nigerians are saying, look, the numbers are not tallying with what we are really facing. And so I tend to agree with that. When I talk about executive rascality, it's like the president also knows that if he's reassuring that this time this budget will be we'll follow it professionally, we've done it with all prudence, we've done it all open. That's to tell you that they really knew that the last budget was not done in such a way that should make it better. In terms of the impact is huge because the world has become a global village and people want to study, want to attract foreign investors, you want to attract foreign investors, you want to attract a lot of investment in your economy. Bigger companies don't invest in your economy unless they look at your budget and what it will help them to plan and also see the way they can be able to be profitable. So when you have a budget that it seems to be a ceremony, and you just see it as a ceremony. After that, we seem to be doing everything different from what we have in the budget. It's not good for investors, especially international investors. And you know that Nigeria really needs those international investors to continue to come in, bring in their effects, so that we have these effects in the market to be able to bring down inflation and also be able to have supply into the system. Yes, I said bring down inflation because it has been proven that the major challenge of Nigerian inflation is not driven by reduction of liquidity in the system, it's largely driven by exchange rate volatility.
Right. And Mukhtar, just before we wrap things up, revenue at 34 trillion naira, deficit at 23, spending at 58. What is a safe gap in your view? And can this new tax law or act, as the president referenced in his speech at the National Assembly, do you think it has what it takes to fill up this black hole, this financial black hole that the government has to deal with next year?
See, when it comes to taxes, there must be clarity in terms of implementation of taxes, because that's where businesses want to see clarity. In terms of that, where you look at those taxes in terms of smaller businesses, there seems to be clarity. In terms of bigger company income tax, there seems to be clarity. In terms of how you want Nigeria to be taxed, there seems to be clarity. But there are a lot of areas that there's no clarity. The capital gain tax, and in terms of capital appreciation, how does clarity come in there? How much of this tax, you have a tax reform, Presidential Tax Reform Committee, then you have the Presidential Implementation Committee. And when you look at the way both of them are talking, they seem to be talking separately. While the Presidential Implementation Committee is talking against engaging stakeholders in gray areas where they think there is challenge. The Tax Implementation Committee, the Presidential Tax Committee is saying, look, we are going ahead with it, with this and that. So that what I'm trying to say is that is already impacting on the gain that you think you will enjoy, because again, you are not sure that you'll be able to see those things see the light of day in terms of profit, because when you look at what he's saying, and like I said, what is going to happen, definitely they are two different things. So I'm not as excited as people will be when you look at that thinking the tax net to cover up this bracket. Like I said, there's a lot of challenges with that law that people still don't understand, especially the issue of the capital gain tax. How do you implement this capital gain tax? How the exemption, foreign investors, how do you keep them? High net Nigerians, investors in the capital market, knowing fully well that what you've enjoyed in terms of exchange rate today was largely driven with the stability that, what you enjoyed in terms of exchange rate stability was driven with the inflow from the capital market, either through Eurobond or through portfolio investment. So that's why I have my challenge that I don't think that tax law will be able to fill in that gap. Right. What we will see is that we'll see a government that will go all out to borrow again.
All right. Two questions, and I'll be pleased if you can answer it in under a minute. One of it is the fact that we have 15 trillion now going into debt servicing, which is a little over 25% of next year's budget. But it's also the question about, you talk about the conservatism in this budget. Can a budget either be realistic or ambitious, or is there a case where it can be both, realistic and ambitious?
Realistic ambitions are part of government, as part of budget. That's what is called budget projection. So it's like you're in your house, you have to be ambitious, but in your being ambitious, you have to be very realistic. So it could happen, but it tells you that as much as you have ambition, you should also be realistic about what your ambition it looks like. Budget servicing at what it is, 25%, I think it's good. Compared debt servicing at 25%, compared from where we are coming from. Because before now, we're having a budget servicing at almost 60, about between 65 to 70% of our earnings. So I think that for me is good news. But like I said, it seems that we might see that happen. But again, when you look at these deficits, where will you get that 23 trillion? Like I told you, the tax law will not be able to fill that gap. So we might see us going out to borrow again, and that will become a cycle, because it's now becoming a cycle normal for Nigeria to keep borrowing each financial year.
Mukhtar Mohammed, as experts like you have always said, it all boils down to how much of it can actually be implemented. in the final analysis. Thank you so much for your take on the 2026 budget. I appreciate you very much for joining us on Daily Politics.
Thank you for having me.
Right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk politics. The PDP, the two factions, the two warring factions regarding the opposition party's leadership crisis have been summoned by INEC. The outcome, well, yet to be determined, but a step in the right direction as far as analysts are concerned. We get to speak to insiders about the potential of this meeting with the INEC chairman and whether or not it has what it takes to finally put this crisis to bed. More on that after the break.